What is up, boys and girls? Londrick here, and now I'm back with another edition of Lundrick's Fave 5s. So this time it's going to be an interesting one. This one, I think, for me anyway. So obviously you've got the Women's Evolution pay-per-view coming up in a couple of weeks. So I had one spare week, so I can do a different kind of video. On this week, it's going to be Fave 5 WCW pay-per-view. So we're going back into the 1990s now and talking about some of the old stuff, which is what I like to do. I like to do that anyway. I mean, for all the shit WCW gets, and a lot of it is deserved, I'll give it that. It's responsible for some of the greatest wrestling ever, really. It's going to be evidenced by these pay-per-views. So, rattle off a few honourable mentions before I get into the list. Super Brawl 2, we can consider that one number 6, because I really wanted to get this other pay-per-view in at number 5, which I'll explain in a minute. Great American Bash 1996 and Bash at the Beach 1996. Super Brawl 8, Great American Bash 1990. But enough about honourable mentions, let's get the Fave 5. But before I do, I just want to point out this. When I say WCW, I'm going to do it from the time Ted Turner bought the company in late 1988 until March 2001. And who knows, maybe I'll do Pacific pay-per-views later on, such as Starcades, Fave 5 Starcades, Fave 5 Halloween Havocs, Great American Bash, etc. But for now, we're just going to do WCW pay-per-views. Coming at number 5, Spring Stampede 1999. And what are you thinking? Really? Something from the last 2 years of WCW? That disaster? And yeah, obviously, let's be honest, the last 2 years of WCW were sucked. There's no other kind of way to say it. It sucked. I would say, obviously, early 1999 and then into probably about around this time, really, is when WCW really started to fall away. Started to lose ground in the WWF from the war. The product just went to shit, really, and all that. Don't like go into too much detail about that, because I could do a whole video of why WCW died and all that shit at some point. But in this time period, they pulled a tremendous pay-per-view out their asses here with Spring Stampede 1999. This has got to be what's considered the last ever truly great WCW pay-per-view, and this pay-per-view was absolutely fantastic. It really, really was. Obviously 1999. Obviously the product was going to crap, but you still had a pretty damn good roster of wrestlers, and I think this show showed that, really. So overall, it's got a nice mixture of things as well. We got cruiserweight action, we got hardcore action, we got big star veterans. Obviously we kick off with probably one of the most underrated wrestling pay-per-view openers of all time, and that's Juventud Guerrero versus Blitzkrieg. Obviously this probably gets forgotten about, really, because Blitzkrieg is a forgotten character, really. I mean, he was only around for a few months, if that, and then he just kind of disappeared. He never went to WWF, never went to WCW, never made a splash in the indie scene, just kind of disappeared. And obviously Juventud Guerrero, probably one of the better cruiserweights around at the time, although you had the likes of Kidman and Mysterio. Juventud Guerrero was awesome, and this match was awesome. I mean, it only went like 10 minutes, but the action they packed in those 10 minutes was absolutely phenomenal. And then we had an amazing finish with Hoovies doing the Hoovie driver off the second rope. Yeah, if you haven't seen that match, I would definitely recommend checking it out. And then also on the show we had interesting hardcore match with Bam Bam Bigelow versus Hack. Who is Hack, you might be wondering? Well, you might know Hack better as the Sandman. That's right. The Sandman had a WCW run in 1999, which probably most people forgot about, but it happened. He was around for probably less than a year, I would say. Maybe 9-10 months, I'm not totally sure. It was weird, like it just kind of looked weird, really, seeing the Sandman in WCW, really. Then of course he went back to ECW late 1999, stayed there at the end, and then didn't have a WWE run for like 6 years later or something. I think it's 06, 07 he was there. Obviously, I think he's always one of those guys that really needed to be in ECW, because Paul Heyman was so good at hiding his flaws and all that. He was just so up with that crowd. But he did have a pretty interesting rivalry with Bam Bam Bigelow. So obviously 1999 was probably the time hardcore wrestling was most popular. I mean, obviously ECW started the trend in the US many years ago. As WWF became more attitude with their hardcore matches were getting more and more regular, especially with Mick Foley around. Then in late 1998, WWF created the hardcore title. And then WCW started following sort of their own hardcore division. I mean, for a while it was really just Raven, Bam Bam Bigelow and Hack. But this was a really good match, it really, really was. I mean, easily the best WCW match Hack ever had. There's two kind of down things on the show. I mean, obviously, Scotty Riggs versus Mikey Whipwreck was just Just kind of, another one, really, another ECW guy who you might not know how to WCW run. Mikey Whipwreck was there for a brief period. And then there was Conan versus Disco Inferno, which wasn't a bad match by any means all. It was just kind of average and didn't really seem that important. But then everything else after this was really good to great. Obviously, you had Rey Mysterio versus Billy Kidman for the Cruiserweight title. This was unmasked, camouflage wearing Rey Mysterio. So obviously, a lot of people shit on unmasked Rey Mysterio. But he still had some pretty good matches in this run, and this was one of them. Obviously, Billy Kidman. Kidman had really emerged over the last year, obviously when the likes of Guerrero and Jericho and all that moved on from the Cruiserweight division. Malenko had been there for a while. Obviously, Mysterio had been there for a few years. Billy Kidman really emerged as one of the top stars of the Cruiserweight division for the last couple of years of the division. I always liked Billy Kidman. I was a fan of Billy Kidman back then. I was looking back, I really like Billy Kidman as well. I think he's a really underrated worker in hindsight for sure. This wasn't an awesome match. It probably could have been better, but it was still a very good match. Then probably my match of the night anyway. Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko versus Raven and Perry Saturn. Was this a tag title match? I'm not sure. I think it was, but I'm not sure. I think it probably was, because I think Benoit and Malenko had beaten Kurt Hennig and Barry Windham for the titles. This was just a kick-ass tag team match, it really was. This was back when Benoit... This is probably right at the very end of the Four Horsemen, because obviously Benoit and Malenko were in the Four Horsemen with Arn Anderson as a manager. I think Mongo had already gone by this point, and then obviously Flair was the world champion doing his own thing, so at the very end of the Horsemen, and then this is they just threw Raven and Perry Saturn together after the Flock disbanded and see where it went. But obviously, really, great match, actually, fantastic tag team match. Obviously, you've got 3 of the 4 Radicals in there, and Raven was always a great really underrated worker, great character. Obviously, looking back, he probably had a really underrated WCW run, to be honest. Especially when you consider how the WWF used him. But yeah, fantastic match here. Then you had Scott Steiner versus Booker T for the United States title. Obviously, they had more famous matches later on for the world title. In particular, the one, the final Nitro. But this was a really good match as well. Obviously, both guys had been singles guys for about a year. Obviously, Booker and Stevie went their separate ways in 98. Scott turned heel on Rick in 98 as well. Yeah, really good match. I mean, some of Steiner's interactions with the crowd were just awesome. And just a reminder of what a great heel Scott Steiner was back in the day. And in kind of how stupid it was, WWE brought him in as a babyface several years later. Now, obviously, these were the 2 breakout stars in the year 2000. But for me, look at this, they were probably ready for that spot in 1999, but of course, WCW didn't pull the trigger until about a year later, which is a shame. Then you had Goldberg versus Kevin Nash, the Starrcade rematch, which was alright. I wouldn't say it was a great match or anything, and to be fair, the Starrcade match probably was better, but it was about a 5, 6, 7 minute match. It wasn't a long match, it didn't outstay it welcome. But it was a decent enough match, and in fairness, Goldberg did get his victory back from Starrcade. And the main event, probably one of the most interesting main events. I mean, for a Fatal 4-Way elimination match for the WCW title, champion Ric Flair versus Sting versus Hollywood Hogan versus Diamond Dallas Page. And you look at that and you think, really? That must have sucked. But in fact, no, it was a really, really enjoyable match, actually. I mean, talk about star power. You got Hogan, you got Flair, you got Sting. Arguably 3 of the top 5 biggest names in the business at the time. Then you got Diamond Dallas Page. What a rise for DDP it was. I mean, just imagine thinking, let's say in 1986, someone sat down and goes, you know what? In 3 years, DDP is going to be the World Heavyweight Champion. People would think you're a fucking nutter. But of course, an awesome rise in 1997 with turning down the NWO, feuding with Savage. And that rise just continued throughout 1998, where he had main event pay-per-views with Hulk Hogan in tag matches. And obviously had that big Halloween Havoc main event against Goldberg. Then here he is finally in 1999. DDP gets the big title win. Gives the diamond cut to Ric Flair. And also I forgot to mention Randy Savage was a guest referee as well. So really, what a great way for DDP to win the world title over Flair, Sting, Hogan, and Savage is the guest referee. So yeah, obviously Spring Stampede 1999. Tremendous pay-per-view. Definitely check this out if you haven't seen it. Coming at number 4, we're continuing the Spring Stampede, although this time we're going back to the very first Spring Stampede 5 years earlier. Spring Stampede 1994. This one took place in Chicago, and obviously Chicago, obviously a great wrestling town. I mean, a lot of great pay-per-views in Chicago, and this is one of them as well. So the first half of 1994 for WCW I thought was pretty damn good. I mean, obviously they had to bring Hogan in for business and all that, but then after that Hogan brought all his friends in, and yeah, just kind of the product at least kind of went to shit. Although obviously having Hogan around was good for business, but I'd say the first part of 1994 was pretty great. I mean, it was just a good wrestling show. You had some great wrestling talent out there, but in this show there's a lot of things to like on this show. I mean, it really was. Opening with DDP and Johnny B. Bad was alright, but I think they had better matches in 95 and 96. Interesting 15-minute time limit draw between Lord Steven Regal and Brian Pillman. I mean, that was an interesting match. Obviously Regal's technical ability, Brian Pillman's high flying, made for an interesting match. Probably one of my favourite matches on the show, obviously Chicago Street Fight for the WCW Tag Team titles. The Nasty Boys versus Cactus Jack and Max Payne. For 1994, this was absolutely amazing. I mean, this, especially in mainstream American wrestling, you hadn't really seen bands like this before. I mean, looking back, I think the Nasty Boys have kind of gotten a little bit forgotten about in history. I mean, they had successful runs in both the WWF and WCW. I mean, they were the best wrestlers in the world, for sure. They weren't the best technical wrestlers. They didn't have the best look, to say the least, but they were great brawlers. They knew how to brawl, and in fact I'll probably say I probably like the WCW run more than the WWF run. That's just me. But yeah, 1994, Cactus and the Nasty Boys. Also right, because at that time Cactus Jack, one of the best brawler, maybe the best brawler in the business. And obviously, people don't remember Max Payne. He wasn't a really memorable character, to be fair. And then he went to the WWF and he was Man Mountain Rock, and that was even worse. But these matches with him and Cactus and the Nasty Boys were definitely the best stuff he'd ever done. I mean, there was just so much action. I mean, this was only about a 10-minute match as well. Maybe even a bit shorter than that, to be fair. And obviously this led, I can't remember what happened, but Max Payne left and Kevin Sullivan took over as Cactus Jack's partner. And I'll say they probably had a better match than this. Cactus and Sullivan had a better match than this at Slamboree later that year. But yeah, awesome match. I mean, a really sick finish as well, with Cactus falling off the ramp, and then one of the Nasty Boys, I think it was Sags, but I could be wrong, whacked Cactus Jack with a shovel and knocked him out. Really good match. We had Dustin Rhodes versus Bunkhouse Buck. That was an underrated as fuck match. It really was. Thought that was a great match, actually. I mean, this was the start of a rivalry. Started with Dustin stood stable, which then led to Arn turning on Dustin, which then led to the War Games with Dusty Rhodes coming out retirement, and then obviously that culminated with Halloween Havoc with Dustin being Arn. But this is a great match. I mean, again, Bunkhouse Buck probably not that a memorable character. I've heard he's a territorial wrestler, but I can't remember his real name. And I think this is the same guy who played Jack Swagger's dad a few years ago on WWE television. And of course, Dustin Rhodes, when he was a young wrestler, he really was one of the best young wrestlers in the business. I mean, obviously everything he did as Goldust was bigger and more memorable. But I do really like his natural Dustin Rhodes run in the early mid-90s. I mean, he was a great worker, and this was a great match. One thing I'll say, probably a bit of a disappointment, the Great Muta versus Steve Austin for the not the television title, the US title. I mean, yeah, that was weird. That was weird, really. That was one of those matches that should have been a hell of a lot better than it was. Yeah, I mean, this wasn't a terrible match, but it was just a really average match, to be honest with you. I mean, it was a slow pace. He didn't really do anything exciting in there. Yeah, I just don't know why, really. It's just weird, really. They had probably what's a significant match. Rick Rude's last ever wrestling pay-per-view match. It was Rick Rude versus Sting, I believe, for the international title. I don't know if this was before or after Rude got the back injury at the end of his career. I think it was a little bit before, because he had this back injury wrestling Sting in a match for New Japan. And then he retired and never came back. This was about a 3-star match. It wasn't a great match, but it was definitely a good match. And obviously, 2 big names on pay-per-views, always good. Then we had Vader versus the Boss. I mean, the Boss, as you might realise, is a big boss man who came in from WCW. And you gotta love the nerve of WCW, haven't you? Trying to get around these copyright laws by, I don't know, slightly changing the colour of his gear, and then just change his name from the Big Boss Man to the Boss. You gotta love that, haven't you, really? Of course, WWF wasn't happy with that. Slapped a cease and desist on WCW, and then Ray Traylor became the Guardian Angel. And you know what? To this day, I've never really understood why if you're getting a cease and desist for the Boss, couldn't you just brought him back as Big Bubba Rogers, his original gimmick? Why the hell did he go with the Guardian Angel? That was awful. But anyway, as far as big man matches go, this was just a really good match. You got the 400-pound Vader, 300-pound Boss Man, just clubbing the shit out of each other. I mean, you think Boss Man and Vader were probably 2 of the best big man workers around, and this reflected that. It's a really good match. And the main event, huge main event for the world title, Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat. 5 years after the epic 1989 trilogy. Could you still do it in 1994? And answer for me was yes. I mean, of course it wasn't as good as the matches 5 years earlier. I mean, both guys are getting into the 40s now. But they still had amazing chemistry. And yeah, it might have been a step slower than it was 5 years earlier. But it was still an awesome match. I mean, just Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. You can't really go wrong with Flair versus Steamboat, can you really? So yeah, I think this is right at the end of Ric Flair's babyface run. He would turn heel shortly after this to accommodate Hogan going in. And this was a few months before the end of Ricky Steamboat's career as well. I mean, I think, got a back injury in August against Austin. And a fall broadly relinquished their United States title and then never wrestled again until 2009. But, so yeah, overall, Spring Stampede 1994. Absolutely awesome pay-per-view. You gotta check it out. Clocking in number 3, we got Super Brawl 3 from 1993. So, the Bill Watts era in WCW gets marginalised a lot. It's very divisive. I mean, a lot of people like it, a lot of people hated it. But it was, I really liked the Bill Watts era in WCW. Thought that wrestling was great. The storylines were pretty good for the most part. And they had a hell of a roster. Now, Bill Watts only lasted in WCW probably less than a year. I mean, he's a very controversial figure, and then this was his last show that he put on because of comments that he made in a Pro Wrestling Torch thing a couple of years ago came to light. a pretty racist comment, which I don't want to get into. I mean, you can look it up, but obviously WCW being a corporate turnaround company, couldn't stand for that. Bill was either fired or quit, depending on who you believe. And then obviously shortly after that, Eric Bischoff took over the executive producer in WCW, and I think he did alright for himself, little Bischoff. I mean, yeah, history was made with that, really. But yeah, so Bill was put on one last show for the company before leaving, and what a show to come out on. I mean, I was going to put Super Brawl 2 on this list, but I thought I think the main event was disappointing, and I really want to have Spring Stampede 1999 in there. But I think overall Super Brawl 3 was just a fantastic card of wrestling. Some awesome matches on this show. We had a decent opener. I believe this is one of the very first matches of the Hollywood Blondes, Steve Austin and Brian Pillman. Maybe not the first one, but one of the first ones, facing the team of Eric Watt and Marcus Alexander Bagwell in a decent opener, but it was really there just to highlight Austin and Pillman. And how about this one for you? Chris Benoit versus Too Cold Scorpio in a 20-minute draw. I don't know what you're thinking, Lundrick. Benoit only debuted for the company in 1995, didn't he? Well, no, actually. Due to WCW's relationship with New Japan, Chris Benoit made a handful of appearances in WCW in 1992 and 1993. And this by far is his most high profile one, against Too Cold Scorpio. And at the time, Chris Benoit was really making his name in Japan as the Pegasus Kid. And I believe at this point, he had unmasked at this point and became Wild Pegasus. So for the most part, obviously in America at the time, the size thing was still an issue, and Benoit at about 5'8", 5'9", 215 pounds maybe, wasn't going to really get a big spot in either WF or WCW, so the bulk of his career was working at New Japan in the junior heavyweight division. But he had not a high profile pay-per-view match, but a featured pay-per-view match against Too Cold Scorpio. And this is a fantastic match, actually, to be fair. I mean, obviously Chris Benoit, personal feelings aside, I mean, gotta be honest, Chris Benoit probably one of the very best wrestlers of all time. And Scorpio was a pretty good worker, I would say. I mean, looking back, it's pretty impressive that some of the stuff he could do at his size. I mean, he could do cruiserweight stuff, but he was about 250 pounds. He had a decent run in WCW. I think he had his best run in ECW. Then, of course, Flash Funk to WWF. Yeah, that was what it was, really. But yeah, they went to a 20-minute... I stand corrected. I was wrong. It didn't quite go to a 20-minute time limit draw. It went like 19 minutes and 58 seconds, and I think Scorpio won. So I nearly went 20 minutes, so I was nearly right. I was mistaken. That happens sometimes. Then we had an interesting match, a Smoky Mountain Wrestling match, the Rock and Roll Express versus the Heavenly Bodies. But interestingly, it wasn't the Heavenly Bodies most people know. I mean, obviously, most people think of the Heavenly Bodies and they'll think of Tom Pritchard and Jimmy Del Rey in the WWF in 93, 94, and I think 95 as well. But this was the original Heavenly Bodies of Tom Pritchard and Stan Lane. Obviously, Stan Lane, better known as being in the Fabulous Ones in Memphis back in the day. And of course, probably the most famous for being in the second incarnation of the Midnight Express in like the late 80s, early 90s. And obviously Rock and Roll, probably one of the best Southern tag teams of all time. I mean, awesome tag team, well-deserved WWE Hall of Fames and all that. So obviously at the time, Jim Cornette and Bill Watts had sorted out a deal to do this. Then when Bill Watts left, I think Cornette and WCW started working together, and then obviously Corny started working for the WWF later that year. I mean, it's ironic really, this match kind of sort of happened in the WWF that year as well, because we also had a Heavenly Bodies Midnight Express match at Survivor Series 1993. But of course the one in the WWF, that was the most famous Del Rey and Pritchard team. Well yeah, really good match, really good match, definitely worth checking out. Probably one of the most interesting matches of the night for me anyway. Cactus Jack versus Paul Orndorff. And on paper, that sounds so fucking weird. I mean, it was a Falls Count Anywhere match as well. I mean, you think, could you have two more opposite wrestlers and Paul Orndorff and Cactus Jack? First off, you got Paul Orndorff, this guy now in his 40s, muscled up entertainer from the WWF Golden Era. I mean, this is a guy who was a main event at the first WrestleMania. This is a guy who had many matches with Hulk Hogan in the 1980s. You're thinking Cactus Jack, the guy. So him and Paul Orndorff, you think no way do those guys have chemistry at all, but they did. They had an awesome match. I mean, it's one of those ones where you'd look at it on paper, you think, no way will these guys click and have a good match. But they did. They actually had a fantastic match. And I think it shows how versatile Cactus Jack Mick Foley could be. I mean, in WCW, he had a lot of good matches with a ton of different guys. So you could have a good match with Sting, you could have a good match with Paul Orndorff. He had great matches getting battered by Big Van Vader. He even had a good match with Van Hammer one time. Then, of course, the tag matches I mentioned in the last video, the Nasty Boys. Just great stuff. A couple of downers on this show, though. The US title match between Dustin Rhodes and Max Payne, which was just, yeah, that was a dull match, really, wasn't it, to be honest. And another disappointing match, but not a bad match, for the NWA title between Barry Windham and the Great Muta. And that's a bit of irony, two great WCW pay-per-views and two disappointing matches from the Great Muta. I mean, you'd think Muta and Barry Windham could have had a really good match, but it was just kind of there. I believe this did have Barry Windham winning the NWA World title, though, which was pretty cool. But then the main event, the White Castle Affair strap match. Big Van Vader versus Sting for the WCW World Heavyweight title. I mean, Vader and Sting, awesome opponents. I mean, you gotta just look back and say the stuff that these two guys did for each other were just brilliant. Obviously, I think the Flair matches are probably the thing that Sting's career is remembered for the most, or at least that version of Sting. I think, although some people might say the 1997 feud of the NWO and Hollywood Hogan, they both build up the Starcade and all that, but a lot of people think of the Flair feud. But the Vader feud is right up there with the Flair feud, in my opinion. Just unbelievable chemistry between these two guys. And they all told that great story of Sting being the underdog, trying to fight the big bad monster Vader. And over the years, he had some phenomenal matches. Obviously, 92, it was Vader beating Sting clean to become the world champion. Then they had an awesome match at Starcade. And then later on, they had a great match at Slamboree 1994. The triangle match that these two had with the Guardian Angel, the Fall Brawl 1994. Awesome stuff. And this was just a brutal match, especially for the time. I mean, obviously, 1993, wrestling was probably even more PG than it is now. So to see these guys whipping each other with straps, getting bloody and all that was just a great match. And obviously for me, a lot of times strap matches aren't that good, because obviously being tied together and stuff, it's quite restrictive what you can do. But these two guys, this is probably the best strap match I've ever seen. I mean, you could argue maybe Stone Cold and Savio Vega would be a dog, but this was just an awesome match and really great way to end the show. So yeah, Super Brawl 3 definitely makes a list. Now we're getting down to the top two. What are the top two WCW pay-per-views ever? For me, number 2, I'm going to go with Beach Blast 1992. So, back in that Bill Watts era that I talked about earlier, I mean, for me, I just really like the Bill Watts era. I really do. I feel like some of the wrestling was pretty awesome. And this was just an awesome show from top to bottom, really. I mean, obviously at the time, WCW was still real distant second to the WWF, to be honest. But a lot of the time, in the early 1990s, WCW had the better product. I mean, obviously that wasn't reflected in business and house shows and ratings and pay-per-view buys, etc. Because much like it is now, WWF was pro wrestling to them, and WCW was always that second company. But in 1992, they had some really good stuff, and I just love this show. I think from top to bottom, just fantastic. So kick off with a pretty good match for the WCW Light Heavyweight title. Back up, did I just say Light Heavyweight Championship? Yes, I did. there was once a WCW Light Heavyweight Championship between Brian Pillman and Scotty Flamingo. It was kind of funny looking at it, because people like Tom Zenk were in this division. I think Johnny Bad was even in this division. They were talking about guys at 230, 240 pounds. I think for Pillman was like 225, and that was considered small. It's just kind of funny where the business is now, with obviously people like AJ Styles and Seth Rollins being top guys and all that, and a lot of people in the 205 division being like 165, 170 pounds. It's kind of weird. Obviously Scotty Flamingo, you probably know better as Raven. This is obviously a few years before he morphed into Raven. And in between, sandwiched in between this was the WWF run as Johnny Polo as a manager and a commentator. But anyway, so really good match actually, to be honest, and quite impressive because obviously I think one of the big things that goes against Bill Watts was these ban on the top rope rule. You couldn't jump off the top rope, that was a disqualification. So, and especially in a high flying match like this, you really need to use the top rope. So these guys got around that fantastically and told a good story and had a good match. And obviously this was Pillman losing the light heavyweight title to Scotty Flamingo, which in turn I think Scotty ended up dropping the title not long after this to Brad Armstrong, and then the light heavyweight division just got scrapped, and then the cruiserweight division was revived in like 1996. Then we had a couple of mid-card matches there. Ron Simmons defeated Terry Taylor, and that was a decent match. It wasn't a great match, but obviously this match was designed to make Ron Simmons look strong because Ron Simmons was on the verge of being the world champion. I believe this took place in late June, and then Ron Simmons was a champion by August, and then a really interesting veteran versus young guy match. On paper, which is a weird match looking back. Greg the Hammer Valentine versus Marcus Alexander Bagwell. I mean, of course, this is like Bagwell's second year in the business, and Valentine had probably been around for a good 20 years at that point. I think Valentine was well into his 40s at that point. I mean, he'd had his original NWA run back in the day. I mean, obviously, he had a pretty long WWF tenure in the late early 80s. I mean, I think then he left in 92, went to WCW. But this is a decent match. I mean, for me, an awesome match in the show. Falls Count Anywhere match. Sting versus Cactus Jack. Just love this match. I mean, it's especially a great match for 1992. Obviously, I mean, let's say Sting had his match with Flair and Vader, but Cactus is probably one of his most underrated opponents. They just work so well together. I mean, Mick Foley took a lot of great bumps for Sting and all that and helped make him look good. They did have a submission match on like Power Hour in November 1991. That's a match worth checking out. But what's interesting about this Sting's a WCW champion. This isn't a title match for, I don't know why. I mean, at this point, I'm not sure, because I think Great American Bash was like 3 weeks later. So Sting and Vader might have already been announced for the Bash, but I'm not certain. But considering the fact Sting was going over anyway, you might as well have made it a world title match to try and make it a bit more interesting. But yeah, this match wasn't really that long match either, really. It was like only like 10, 11, 12 minutes, something like that. But the amount of action they packed in that match was just tremendous, absolutely tremendous. I mean, Cactus took some hellacious bumps. Sting looked really good by beating him, although kind of funny, the match ended in a backslide on the ramp, you know. Then we got a 6-man tag match of the Dangerous Alliance, taking on Barry Windham, Dustin Rhodes and Nikita Koloff. Dangerous Alliance was Arn Anderson, Steve Austin and Bobby Eaton. I mean, this was not long after the legendary War Games match at Wrestle War 1992. And this was a good enough tag team match. I don't think it was fantastic or anything like that, but a very good match. Although it did have a significant finish. So remember what I told you before about the whole coming off the top rope was illegal. Now this match featured Ole Anderson as a special guest referee. But one of them, I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Arn. Came off the top rope, hit their opponent, and then they got disqualified. So they really just did that to demonstrate that the rule would be adhered to. Then we had two more awesome matches. Obviously the match of the night, an absolute classic, a 30-minute Iron Man match. Ricky Steamboat versus Rick Rude. Although again, like the Vader Cactus match, the WCW United States title was not on the line, which I thought was strange. But anyway, so obviously Ricky Steamboat and Rick Rude had a fantastic feud in 1992. Two of the best workers in the world at the time. Obviously, they had a few matches previous in the WWF, most notably at the first ever Royal Rumble show. But back in 1992, Rick Rude, I always preferred Rick Rude in WCW to Rick Rude in the WWF. Feel like just with the short haircut, with him like the Medusa and Paul Heyman and Dangerous Alliance, just awesome stuff. Ricky Steamboat had a fun. I always liked Ricky Steamboat's 91 to 94 run. Steamboat was a veteran at the time, but he was still fucking awesome. Yeah, this match for 30 minutes, just a classic match. I mean, just the selling on display here was incredible. A great pace. If they wanted to, they really could have done an hour Iron Man match if they wanted to, but they went for the 30-minute one instead. And yeah, if you want to watch a WCW match in this era, this is definitely one of the essential matches to check out for sure. Then the main event for the WCW Tag Team titles, the Steiner Brothers versus Terry Gordy and Steve Williams. So obviously with Watts taking over, he's going to bring some of his old friends in. Obviously one of Watts' biggest stars in his Mid-South days was Dr. Death Steve Williams. And then he brought his tag team partner in, former Fabulous Freebird Terry Gordy. Now at the time, Williams and Gordy, I believe they were working in All Japan. Could be New Japan, but I think it was All Japan, but I could be wrong. But now they came to WCW, and what I loved about this rivalry is obviously the Steiner brothers, badasses, amazing wrestlers, all that. But for the most part, Steiners had their own way for the most part. I mean, not many teams were really a good match for them. I think obviously the closest we had was Doom, but then Williams and Gordy, who were just as accomplished as the Steiner brothers, seen as just as tough as the Steiner brothers, and now you're looking, this team could be the team that gives the Steiner brothers a lot of trouble, and they did. I mean, this just felt like a gritty, real match, if you know what I mean. Four just men just duking it out. I think there was a lot of amateur stuff on display here, and just two badass teams having just a physical, stiff as fuck wrestling match. Awesome stuff. I love this match. I like this rivalry in general. I think it's fucking awesome. And this went with a 30-minute time limit draw. I think a lot of people didn't like that, but I enjoyed that for what it was. And yeah, so overall, Beach Blast 1992 is my number 2. So, in the history of WCW, what is my favourite ever WCW pay-per-view? Well, Great American Bash 1989 takes that one. What a pay-per-view this was. I think a lot of people call this the best WCW pay-per-view of all time, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. I just think overall as a show, this was fantastic. The last 4 matches alone, wow. So obviously 1989, Ted Turner had bought the company in late 88, taken over from Crockett. Obviously it was still the number 2 at WWF, and it was in nowhere near like challenging the WWF for ratings and buy rates and all the business shit and that. But for me, I thought NWA WCW in 1989 was fantastic. You had Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat at the peak. Then they brought in Terry Funk. Then you had the likes of Sting, Lex Luger. They brought in the Great Muta. Then you had guys coming up such as Brian Pillman. So you had great tag teams there like the Midnight Express. The Steiner brothers had started. Don't think did Doom start in 89? I can't remember. Possibly. The Road Warriors were still there. The Samoan SWAT team was still there. Barry Windham was there for a bit, but then he left for the WWF. But yeah, some great stuff, and this was really the pay-per-view. Pay-per-view really, wasn't it? I will admit the undercard wasn't fantastic or anything. Obviously it was a 2-ring battle royal to start with, which was won by Sid Vicious and Dan Spivey, who then decided just to share the money. Then you had a couple of random mid-card matches. There was Brian Pillman versus Wild Bill Irwin. That was a decent match, really, because it was an early Pillman match. It was designed to get Pillman over. Probably a shitty match, but a kind of an entertaining one, with a tuxedo match between Paulie Dangerously and Jim Cornette. I mean, come on, they were two managers. It was never going to be a Mac classic, but it was kind of entertaining for what it was. For two non-athletes having a match. What else? A really good sprint actually. It was a very early Steiner Brothers match against Kevin Sullivan and Mike Rotunda. I mean, as far as 2-3 minute matches go, this was really good. I think they did as much as they could in the time that they had, but they had a really good match. But it's really the last 4 matches that make this show amazing. I mean, all the last 4 matches are all fantastic in their own way. Obviously, first you got Sting versus the Great Muta for the television title. Holy fuck! This match was like 7-8 minutes long, but it was unbelievable. I mean, at the time, Great Muta was a revelation in the United States. I mean, we hadn't really seen anyone who could do the stuff that Muta could do. And probably Muta was an underrated as fuck opponent for Sting as well, because obviously they both had the face paint and all that. So, just, yeah, difference like that. Obviously, Muta was a different challenge for Sting. He wasn't the technical guy Ric Flair was, or he wasn't the power guy that Vader would be later. But obviously, he was just as skilled. He was faster than Sting. It's a fantastic match. I mean, they packed so much action in that time. It really wasn't unbelievable. But if you want to watch an awesome short match, I would probably recommend this as being the one to check out. If you want to look for awesome matches under 10 minutes, you can't really go wrong with this. This was probably one of the better ones. Finish was kind of though, with a disputed finish, but suppose they wanted to protect both guys. I mean, and they did have other matches later on. Then we got one of the more forgotten War Games matches on this show. This is it. So it was a Midnight Express, the Road Warriors, and Dr. Death Steve Williams. So yeah, at this point the Midnight Express were baby faces, which is kind of ill-advised in my opinion. Didn't really see the Midnight Express as baby faces at all, but whatever. Then obviously teamed with the old rivals, the Road Warriors. And then Dr. Death Steve Williams to face the team of the Fabulous Freebirds, but it wasn't the original Freebirds. It was Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, Jimmy Garvin, and the Samoan SWAT team. I mean, obviously, War Games is awesome, and you know what? If I get time, I'll probably do a Fave 5 War Games video before this year's War Games match. But I've said a lot of times how much I love the War Games matches, and this was another fantastic one. It wasn't one of the best ones, I'll grant you that. I mean, obviously, I feel like some of the very early Four Horsemen ones were better, and obviously the legendary Dangerous Alliance vs Sting Squadron match, that was unbelievable. But yeah, overall, all the guys had a memorable match. Then the last 2 matches, obviously first for the United States title, Ricky Steamboat versus Lex Luger. Wow, another fantastic shortish match. I think this went about 10-12 minutes as well, but whoa, packed a hell of a ton of action in there. I mean, obviously, I think Lex Luger gets underrated by today's wrestling fans, because obviously they see the narrative that he's this shitty muscle-bound wrestler and all that. And maybe later in his career he was. I mean, obviously, last few years at WCW he was kind of shit. And obviously, I think his WWF run, it was what it was. It wasn't really that good. But obviously, his first WCW run, he was pretty damn good wrestler, to be fair. I mean, he had awesome matches with Flair. But at the time, Ricky Steamboat had just come off that legendary matches with Ric Flair. Then he moved on to feud with Lex Luger, who was having an amazing run as United States champion. I mean, I've always thought that Lex Luger was probably the best US champion of all time, my opinion anyway. But yeah, they had a fantastic match. I mean, great heel move at the start where Lex Luger had a note from his lawyer, where Lex Luger would not wrestle unless the disqualification rule was waived. And so yeah, great match. I mean, Steamboat and Luger had good chemistry. I mean, Ricky Steamboat managed to get a lot of good matches out with Lex Luger. I mean, this is just an awesome match. Then a big main event for the World Heavyweight title, Ric Flair versus Terry Funk. Now, if we took to 1989, Ric Flair had maybe the 2 best feuds of his entire career. I mean, obviously the Steamboat feud is being talked about, doesn't need elaborating on here. But after that match, because Terry Funk was one of the ringside judges for that match, then looked like Terry Funk had made a little joke about challenging Ric Flair for the world title. Then Ric Flair he did, he brushed him off saying, you know what, we've got the top contenders, list here in the NWA. You haven't really been active for a while, so he just blew off Terry Funk's challenge, and Terry Funk was acting like he was only kidding about challenging him. Then he went to psycho bastard Terry Funk, attacked Ric Flair, like really put a beating on him, started screaming at him, saying, I'm not a contender! He thinks I'm not a contender! Then he started calling him a bucktooth, banana nose jerk. And then, probably a famous moment, really, he pile drove Ric Flair on the announce table, or maybe the timekeeper's table, but obviously putting people through tables became very popular many years later. But as far as US wrestling, Terry Funk pile driving Ric Flair through a table was a landmark moment. Then they did the whole angle of Ric Flair having a broken neck, possibly retiring. But then this turned Ric Flair babyface, by the way. But then Ric Flair decided to come back and face Terry Funk for the title at the Great American Bash. This was a great match as well. I do feel like the I Quit match they had at Clash of the Champions in November was a lot better, obviously, but this was great too. Really was. I mean, Terry Funk, everyone talks about Terry Funk being old, but he was old even then. He was like in his mid-40s then. And I remember, like, nearly a decade later, he was a world champion in ECW. Then he went back to the WWF for a run, and then he even wrestled, I think he's even been wrestling the last couple of years, amazingly enough. But yeah, obviously Flair and Funk, two of the greatest of that era for sure. Had an awesome match. Just a great way to end the show, really. So yeah, that's a wrap for this video, guys. Next week I'll be doing Fave 5 WWE women's matches, and I've decided I probably am gonna watch a review of the WWE Evolution pay-per-view. Probably, I'm not gonna promise. In November. So after that, we're gonna go Survivor Series related videos. We'll have Survivor Series related videos, so I've got 3 in mind. Fave 5 Survivor Series elimination matches. Fave 5 other matches Survivor Series, so example, Bret Hart vs Stone Cold in 1996. Then of course Survivor Series shows, and if I have time before Survivor Series I'll probably do Fave 5 War Games matches as well. So thanks for watching, guys, and until next time, peace.